Have you ever been a new user coming to Linux and you get to the point where you're like, how the heck do you install programs? And you realize really quickly it seems like every single tutorial online has you open up Terminal and type something in to get it going. However, depending on your version of Linux or what distribution of Linux you're on, this can look very different. So that's what I'm covering in this video. It's very important to know how to install programs in Linux. What's the right way? What's the wrong way? All these different things is what I'm covering in this video. This video is brought to you by Private Internet Access, one of the only no-log VPN services that have been proven in court. I've personally used them for the past 4 years, and I highly recommend them. I've never had any issues in that 4 years, and why I recommend them exclusively on this channel. So first off, right out of the gate, what's the proper way to install a program in Linux? Now, most people will say you use the package manager to install whatever program you need. Almost every program out there is probably on your package manager. Now, we'll get into the exceptions here later in the video, but for now, let's focus on the 90% of programs that you're going to be installing. Now, this is kind of a tricky thing. Most guides online are based on what's called apt or apt. You'll see it'll say sudo apt install OBS Studio. Now, that's great as long as you're running a Debian-based distribution. And what that means is if it's Debian, Ubuntu, Linux Mint, Pop! OS, and there's literally 100 or so Debian-based distributions. But the thing to know is really they're all kind of the same when it comes to installing programs. Almost all of them install via a package manager, and almost all of them use apt as their package manager because they're all based on this granddaddy distribution, which is called Debian. So whether you're Ubuntu or any of those ones I just listed, it all pretty much uses apt or apt. So that's kind of an important thing to know. So if you're in this camp and you're following instruction guides online, typically it's always that sudo apt install. Now, if you're on a different distribution, you can't just type in sudo apt install because that's not your package manager. That's really important to distinguish the differences of package managers. So I'm personally not on a Debian-based distribution on the studio machine out here, so I'll be able to show you a different package manager. All right, as far as installing packages like the package manager on Fedora, Red Hat, and CentOS, which is Yum and or DNF. So since I'm using Fedora, it's newer and it will use what's called DNF. It's basically like a supercharged Yum. So we'll just do an update because that's the easiest here. And we'll just do sudo DNF upgrade. And this will go through, check all my packages, and upgrade anything. It's found that my web browser is a little out of date. Do I want to update this today? We'll go ahead, hit yes. It'll download it and install it. I really like DNF. It's probably one of my favorite package managers because it does such a good job finding all those dependencies, which I'll talk about here in a minute. So that's it. It upgraded all my programs just now, and it's on the latest and greatest versions. And that's DNF. Now, you can also use Yum because Yum is the legacy package. Now, if you're using an older version of like Red Hat or an old version of CentOS and you're a sysadmin, you'll probably be on Yum still because most of those old systems hadn't been updated in several years. And the latest and greatest, I think, finally moved to DNF just recently in Rel 8. So with that, we'll do sudo Yum upgrade, and you'll see this also works. But since we just upgraded everything, there's no need to do that. Now, again, the cool thing about Linux is I just did this upgrade and install a bunch of stuff, and I don't need to reboot. I can literally just launch right back into Vivaldi, and you'll see it pull up, and everything's right with the world. So we'll go ahead and set that as my default. But this is the web browser, pretty awesome. Nothing too crazy here. It just upgraded that entire web browser no restart needed. With Windows, a lot of times when you do a repair on a program, you uninstall and reinstall. It's like, hey, we made registry things, we got to reboot. None of that business happens with Linux. The only time you need to reboot is when it upgrades the actual Linux kernel over here. Then you would actually have to do an upgrade, which this is actually changing in a lot of the newer versions. I think actually Fedora 31 is one of the newest one, where underneath it can actually upgrade the actual system without any reboots needed. So that's amazing. And honestly, when it comes to like Ubuntu and Debian based stuff, these updates don't happen too often, maybe once a month or two. To where you would actually need to reboot your system. So technically you could run Linux solid for a month. And I think Ubuntu has a live patch program, much like Fedora is doing, and it can do on-the-fly upgrades without reboots needed as well. So Linux, awesome. I should mention, you don't need to reboot almost ever if you don't want to. Now, I'm still such a lifetime Windows user. I still like to reboot every once in a while. Call me crazy. Now that you've seen Yum and DNF using what is called RHEL or Red Hat based distributions, these are mainly for business. So that's why I kind of want to show this second. Now, third is really gonna be Arch based systems because it uses what's called Pac-Man, kind of like the old retro game. And it's kind of have a weird syntax. You know, there's apt install, there's dnf install. There's also a different distributions with different package managers that I probably won't cover in this video, but I'm going to go ahead and flash up a little reference guide probably over here, just so you can kind of see the different package managers with different distributions. Know that it's fairly easy to install all this stuff after you know the syntax. That's why I'm like, distribution doesn't matter is one thing I always say, but really the thing that really distinguishes every version of Linux is its package manager. That's what really is at the core of all these distributions. Yes, the desktop environment, other things I've gone over in the Linux Basics series definitely matters, but I would say the package manager really distinguishes a distribution, not so much the look and feel, because at the end of the day, all my distributions, whether I'm on a Debian-based distribution, whether I'm on Fedora like you've seen here, or whether I'm on Arch, they all look the same to me because I've got this same look and feel. I really like how my desktop's laid out, so I just set up every single version of Linux I'm on to look like this. However, underlying that is the package manager, and it's fundamentally different. So inside I use Manjaro or Arch-based distributions, and Pac-Man's syntax is weird, and I'm just going to go ahead and throw that out there. I wanted to bring up a little segment of Arch just so you can kind of see it. It does use a little bit of weird syntax, but at the same time, I like Pac-Man just fine. It's not my favorite package manager, but at the same time, I really love Arch for building out packages and installing programs using a different method. So now that we've covered the basics, the core of actually using package managers, what happens when you try to install something and it just doesn't work, or it's not available in that package manager? So sometimes this is dependency resolution. That means like part of what that program needs isn't installed yet. So a good example of this is, let's say I was building out a website and it was requiring Composer. I would make sure that it had PHP before I would install Composer. Now, a good package manager, you say, let's say sudo dnf install Composer, it would be like, hey, I see you don't have PHP installed, grab that dependency and put it in there. That's pretty good, and Linux has really come a long ways too. So that happens almost all the time, but occasionally you run into a problem where the dependency is not available or it doesn't know what it is, and you have to find that out, hunt it down, install it manually, and then install the program you want. So dependency resolution, I just wanted to do a little tidbit about that right now, but know that you can search this down, and this part is can be a little finicky. It used to be a big thing like 10 years ago probably in Linux, but nowadays I really don't do much dependency resolution. It's almost always done automatically for me. So let's say you don't have good dependency resolution and you can't search and find that package that program relies on you. What do? I'd say you go to basically the second way of installing programs. And this is kind of like, I'm going to call it containerized installing of programs. It's not really a container per se, but it acts like it. And what that means is everything's baked in. Every single dependency that's relied on that program is baked into this container. And there's three versions of this, or three ways to install a program in this containerized way, and that is using Flatpaks, which is my personal favorite. There's snaps, which if you're on like an Ubuntu based distribution, this is very, very easy. And then there's what's something called app images. So I'm gonna go ahead and touch on each one of these real fast. Flatpaks is very universal. It doesn't have a centralized repository to where it's kind of spread out everywhere. That's why it's my personal favorite. It also has one of the biggest repositories. It seems to be the easiest to me to install once you learn the syntax. I'm going to make a separate video on Flatpak coming up. I don't think I have yet, so I will, but be looking for that. I'm probably going to make that for Friday's video or later this week. Second up is snaps. Now I have made an entire video of this. It's actually called Snapcraft. It's Ubuntu's version of Flatpak. And what that is it's so easy. It's baked into all these Ubuntu based distributions to where you just go snap install Nextcloud server, those types of things. And it just goes and packages everything together and just plops it right on the system. So it makes it very easy for everything to work properly. However, I don't like snaps. I've kind of come out against this in the past. Why I called like Ubuntu the devil in one of my videos was mainly because it's a little proprietary. The actual central server is controlled by Canonical, and I don't believe there's any independent Snapcraft servers. That's why I don't particularly like it, because one company holds the keys to all of Snap installs. So that's why I never push it. That's why I never advocate for it. However, I did make a video over installing and using Snap. So if you'd like to check that out, check the title card. And then lastly, we have app images. Now, app images, I've also done a video for, so check the title card on it, but it works a little bit differently than Flatpak and Snaps. When it comes to Flatpak and Snaps, it's kind of like that same apt install program name. However, when it comes to app images, it doesn't really work like Flatpaks or Snaps. However, it's still containerized. This is cool, and it also kind of sucks. So I'll explain why it's cool. It's cool because you can go on, let's say, kdenlive.org, go over, download the app image, put it in a folder, and then just run that one file. It launches that entire Kdenlive instance. It never updates. It always has the same dependencies, and it's just stuck in time. That's awesome, but it also sucks because you're sitting there and it never updates and it's stuck in time. So you have to go back to, Kdenlive's website, download the new app image every time you want to cycle through this. So this kind of stinks. Also, the other kind of con to app image and why it's probably one of the reasons why I don't really use it very often, except for select circumstances, is because when you install app image, sometimes there's an integration piece to this. Now, I think Ubuntu and some Ubuntu-based distributions have it to where you click on app image and it like installs it automatically on your system. I kind of hate this because it is really messy. It's hard to clean up when it integrates with your system because there's no uninstall package when it comes to app images. So I don't like app image integrations, and only a select number of distributions have this, and there's some GitHub articles and projects that people have done that help this on other distributions. But I say stay away from app image integrations, because when time comes and you want to get rid of that package, it's much easier just to hit delete on that app image file. And typically, if I'm always constantly using the same app image version, I create my own .desktop file and put it in applications. And I've made a whole video over that. Again, check the title card. I kind of go through how to use app images, and if you want to do integrations, you can. However, again, I don't recommend it because when you go to upgrade and those types of things, it can be a little bit of a headache. All right, and the third way we're going to talk about, which we've gone over package managers, we've gone over kind of the containerized programs, and then we have the third method. And this is kind of like the tried and true. If you're a Windows user coming to Linux, you're so used to going to the website, downloading the executable file, running it, and then going through the whole process of installing that on your system. This way always kind of sucks, and I never recommend it, especially when it comes to Linux. It's the same method exists on Linux. However, you should never do this. Now, I've personally done this a couple times, and I remember I made, I think, a NVIDIA driver installation video once, and I went to NVIDIA's website, downloaded the driver package, and then ran it. And I think the comment section completely blew up, and I got roasted. Worse than, those roasts that you see on Comedy Central. It was pretty bad because all the Linux vets came out and skewered me. Rightfully so, because you can install NVIDIA drivers directly through your package manager, which is the first method. And if you can install it with the first method, typically you should install it with your package manager. So very important to know. But this third method of actually going and grabbing the package and installing it is completely fine. Now, there's really two packages that exist like this in the Linux community, and that's RPM packages and then also DEB packages. These packages really only cover two branches of Linux versions or distributions. That is Debian-based, which is DEB, and also RHEL-based, Red Hat-based, which would be Fedora, CentOS, and Red Hat Enterprise Linux. These use RPM packages. So these are really the two main packages you see on when you go to download from someone's website. And that's okay, and you have to install it in command line. I'm going to go ahead and drop to command line or terminal so you can see this, and I'll pop up my terminal screen and do an RPM install of a package. But note, you should only do this when the package literally just doesn't exist for your system. All right, so here is an example package install. We're going to install No Machine today. This is a remote package to basically do remote desktop. Think of a more powered version of remote desktop that's in Windows. This is very nice, and this is actually Windows compatible as well. So I kind of like to use this when I'm feeling quite lazy and I just want to remote into a whole bunch of different machines. You can just install this package on pretty much any Linux install, any Windows install, or any Mac install, and just remote into all of them. So I'm going to download what's called the RPM package. However, I'm using a 64-bit system, so we'll need this one right here. Now, if I was on Debian, I would just download the DEB package. So we'll hit download. All right, now Vivaldi is finished downloading. I'll go ahead and exit out of this, and we'll launch into terminal. So to install a package, we'll just simply go to the downloads folder, and then we'll just do a sudo rpm-i for install, v for verbose, and h for something else. I forget what that H is for. So rpm-ivh. Now, if this is a deb package, this would be something completely different. But let's go ahead and install this using this command. All right, and it is finished. So you see that took only about 20 to 30 seconds. Installing programs on Linux is pretty awesome just because of the speed once you figure out how to install programs, that is. However, if this was an Ubuntu-based distro, you'd do sudo dpkg space -i space, and then it would be the nomachine.deb package, like that. That would be the syntax on Ubuntu and Debian-based machines. A little bit easier than Fedora, but I wanted to show both just in case you need to know this. All right, so let's talk about the fourth and final way to install programs in Linux, and that is build it from source. You hear it all the time, usually on the Arch Linux forums because someone's trolling you, but at the end of the day, Linux is Linux, and if a program's over here, typically you can build it over here because most things are open source, and if it's open source, you can build it. However, I caution you, if you're a noob and you're not used to building packages, This way, I completely do not advise you to do, because you can run into errors and probably will run into errors when building packages, and it can be a complete nightmare to navigate this section. I'm not going to sit here and go through this whole thing. However, I did make a dedicated video on it. Again, check the title card for that, or the description, because building from source has a lot of nuances to it. Some programs use certain compilers, others use just different ways of doing it. However, I want to add a little asterisk here. In method 3, when I was talking about DEB and RPM files, it should be noted I didn't really touch on Arch, because Arch, what do? It can't run a DEB package. It can't run an RPM package. However, most of these packages run just fine on Arch Linux. Why is that? And it has something called the Arch User Repository. It's way better than all of these things, because guess what? That repository is curated by the actual users, since Arch User Repository, and it will go ahead and do a script and build these programs automatically for you. So it's even better. When it comes to step 3 and 4, I love Arch Linux the most for pretty much everyone, because you can use what's called the AUR, the Arch User Repository, and run a simple command like yay-s install, and just go ahead and put whatever program you want after the -s, and it'll install that program, or build it if it can't install from an actual package. So it's really a powerful tool. So those are the 4 ways to install programs on Linux. I wanted to touch on all this because depending on the version of Linux you have, what distribution you're on, it can be a little wonky, and navigating this, I think, is something that you need to absolutely understand, because when you go to a help article and you're trying to install something, or you see a new shiny program and you go to download it, you're presented with a ton of options, and now you'll be able to know what those options are. And that is extremely powerful and will help you with your adoption of Linux. Whenever you use it, you'll go, oh, okay, well, that's for Arch users, or, oh, that's for Debian-based users. You'll just know right off the get-go, hey, this help article is not for me, and you won't waste 30 minutes or an hour trying to install something that just doesn't install on your system. So very important to know. I didn't touch on some of the more complex distributions, because once you get to like Gentoo or Void Linux or Slackware, these types of things are beyond everything I talked about. So it's mainly for those extremely advanced users and wouldn't be suitable for a Linux basics video. So I didn't touch on those. However, they do exist, and there are a couple more nuances to this, but you just don't really see them in the wild, and most people won't ever write a how-to guide with these distributions in mind. So with all that, let me know your thoughts down in the comment section below. As always, thank you to my patrons. Without you, I couldn't make videos like this one, and I'll see you in the next one.